Welcome to Diagnosing Dx, the podcast giving diagnostics the platform it deserves. While therapeutics and devices often take centre stage, diagnostics is the engine driving precision medicine. I'm your host, David Philby, and each week we spotlight the innovators, breakthroughs, and real-world challenges shaping the future of DX. Kidney transplantation is one of the greatest advances in modern medicine, but monitoring patients after transplant still relies heavily on biopsies and decades-old testing. I sat down with Sara Barrington, CEO of Verici Dx, to unpack how RNA sequencing and AI are changing the way clinicians predict rejection, avoid unnecessary immunosuppression, and improve long-term transplant outcomes. We also go deep into building a diagnostics company, licensing, and going public from day one. Welcome to the show this week. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, David. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. And where in the world are you?
I am in sunny California. If you're in London, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I need to get out, to be honest. I left the country for 11 years, been digital nomading a little bit, and we'll land somewhere shortly.
Well, I came to California on a 3-year plan, and that was 26 years ago.
There's something about Brits in the US. I think you and I spoke about this offline before. There's something about the optimism and the sort of can-do attitude of the US compared to the UK, which really, I think that when a Brit goes and lives there, it becomes infectious and you become just a bit more optimistic. It sort of, it drags you along a bit.
That's the foundation of the entrepreneurial spirit. But I haven't quite migrated to telling everyone I'm awesome. But I have graduated from telling everybody that I can't grumble and things are not too bad.
Awesome. All right, we've got quite a lot to get into. I'm excited about this one because it's a really unique story, and there's going to be some great insights. So before we do that, why don't you introduce yourself and your background and career and who you are?
Thank you. Well, very formally, I feel like I'm at a work presentation now. I'm Sara Barrington. I'm the CEO of Verici Dx. Everyone can tell by my accent, originally a Londoner. So half my adult life in the UK, half of my adult life in the US, translating technologies out of universities, out of the tech transfer offices, what we say from the bench to the clinic. So that's my background, really. I've been doing that for the last 6 years now. So a quarter of a century in healthcare.
And how much of that healthcare experience has been specifically within diagnostics?
The majority. I've had a little flirt with pharmaceuticals. I dabble with medical devices, but really the predominant experience in my career has been in diagnostics across disease groups, but started out in kidney, and now I'm back to kidney transplants.
Yeah, right. Take us through the diagnostics companies you've worked for and been a part of.
Yeah, we started off with a technology that came out of Australia, and it was a new test for kidney disease, and that's the 25 years ago technology, very ahead of its time. A new understanding of the kidney, actually, at the time, from a brilliant academic out of Monash University. Recognized that the kidney was not just a filter, but an active processor, and therefore the way that we would test the kidney's health was going to be different. Then from there, I went into learning about the exosomes, one of the big FedEx carriers of the body. That technology came out of Brigham's in the Boston area. And again, fascinating. It turns out that exosomes are in all biological fluids and are a great source of information. Because they're covered in a kind of fatty lipid, and that preserves the internal information. So breaking them open was the ability to get information. I think this is old news now, but at the time it was, quite breaking news. The first diagnostics we developed was for prostate cancer in that one. That one got sold to Biotech, and I believe last year they got sold on again. So that was exosomes. I have also done pressure ulcer monitors. That was a fascinating area. That's still an active product in the clinic. Lung cancer before, an early stage, very small tumor test that's currently in the clinic. And now last 5 years in kidney transplant testing, which is Verici.
Interesting. And through that time, now obviously CEO of Verici, what were the roles that you played coming through those companies?
Yeah, I started off in finance with very small companies. The title of CFO may as well come with COO, general dog's body. There's a lot to do in a small company. We always wear lots of hats. So I gained a lot of experience, did product development for the medical device, operational, but essentially came through the finance, the business route, understanding how to raise money. It's an important part of being a CEO for a small company is you can't choose just one thing or another. One thing might be operational, one thing might be fundraise. No, you have to be able to do both. Again, it's this sort of changing hats all the time. So my business background gave me a good insight into how to tell a story financially. That's the modeling, how to raise money, how to talk with investors. The operational side of the role enabled me to understand how we operate in a regulated environment, how you do product development. It's my background in London have been more in tech. And tech and biotech product development are really quite different with different requirements and a lot more steadiness and sort of gates that you need to go through in healthcare to keep patients safe.
Coming through that background, has that helped you prepare for a CEO role of a public company? Has that been beneficial because you have that outlook and perspective?
Yeah, I think so, actually. I think it's been helpful. I think what's really helped investors is to know that I've always got the return back to them in mind. There's a phrase from the private world. VCs will tell you that their biggest fear is when a management team goes what they call lifestyle. They're getting a nice salary, the business is ticking over, they're doing all right, the company's doing all right, but it's not really providing a return. And for the investor, they need to see a return back to them, either in terms of value growth in the share price, or there's a dividend, or you sell the company. One way or the other, the investors need to see a return. And so understanding that, thinking about the value drivers of a company, and not just the operational, is the business ticking over, but extending that always, all the way through to thinking about what is the return to the shareholder, what are they looking for, where is the value in this company to them.
That makes complete sense. I never really thought about it like that, but in the eyes of investors, whether you're raising capital or whether you're a public company, that makes complete sense that people would want to know that the person in charge has further ambitions and wants to sort of see growth and beyond. So I guess take us through who Verici Dx are. Give us an insight into Verici.
Yeah, we're a 5-year-old company. And in fact, we went public right from the get-go, and happy to chat to you about that decision. But we are a diagnostic company that combines, if you like, traditional lab-based techniques. We use RNA sequencing with AI. And I remember the day when somebody said, "Did you use ChatGPT to select your genes?" And we were like, "Yeah, no, not in healthcare." That's a language-based model. Healthcare for the last 30 years has used these sort of deep mathematical models to kind of decipher what is a very, very one of the last complex areas, or the last areas of discovery in the world, which is the human body. So we developed that, and we are in kidney transplant space. with the ability to go into other organs and other disease areas, because the basis of the technology is this RNA signature. So think about RNA being the messages of the body. What we do, the sequencing, is we basically take all of those messages, and then we, if you like, the algorithm is the asking a very specific clinical question, and the answer is obviously the test. So we developed 3 tests initially, and uh, uh, all of those were blood-based. We now have a urine program, and we've gone out of just straight RNA signatures into protein-based, but nevertheless, the same approach. And the clinical questions that we ask of the body is pre-transplant: how aggressive or benign is the patient's immune system likely to be? And there was nothing like it. All the tests were around the organ or the compatibility with the patient. Nothing just solely focused on the patient. And that got licensed out to Thermo Fisher, who are the kind of the gurus in the pre-transplant space. So they could put it with their portfolio. The next clinical question along, if you like, the patient journey was how likely is it that the patient's having a rejection event that the clinician needs to intervene in? The body is able to do a certain amount of resolution of conditions itself. I always tell people we all have cancer, but what we think of cancer is when the body can't cope with it, can't resolve it anymore. And it's the same for all other conditions. The body is able to deal with a certain amount itself. Beyond that, it needs clinical intervention. And the clinicians want to know, when am I useful? When do I need to take action? So it's a real call to action. That's our flagship product called Tutivia, and that's the one we sell ourselves. And then the third one in that kind of end-to-end portfolio, which is still coming out of the validation because it's long-term outcomes, we call it Protega, and it asks us the question, long-term, is this patient likely to lose their transplant for long-term factors such as fibrosis? Is it rapidly progressing? Is it a slow burn? Stuff like that. And that's that we're looking forward to, first of all, offering to the research community and then to the clinic, but that's in process this year.
Mm. The first test, in terms of it being licensed to Thermo Fisher, was that always a plan to get that first test out through a licensing setup, or was that opportunity came along and a great way to widen adoption and access to the test?
Yeah, I think, when you're in this space, you have a number of options open to you at all time. And I always assure everybody, both strategically, internally, and externally, that I talk to everyone. We always look at all possibilities. So was it the plan? No. Was it on the horizon as a plan? Yes. I think with that one, we had a champion in Thermo Fisher that could really see the uniqueness of the test and the importance of putting it in their portfolio. So they had, they were the pioneers in One Lambda, which is a division of Thermo Fisher Scientific. They were the pioneers in what we call HLA, which is this sort of matching between the patient and the organ. They have other sort of pre-transplant tests as well, based more around the organ, but there was this idea that they were the pioneers in this area. And so for them to be able to complete that portfolio with the addition of something like this, so now they have something on the patient, the organ, the compatibility. It's a nice solution. And I think, in healthcare, we are interested in sort of going from just single tests to solutions. I think they had the vision to see that, and they moved incredibly fast. We announced the results of our validation trial, and within months we had licensed it to them. So, people talk about large companies moving very slowly. That was a real case where a champion can make all the difference. Made the case, they moved quickly. And that was good validation, and it made sense to me to license that technology there. We're a small company. We were busy with our main product, or our flagship product at the time, and it was good to put it in a home where I felt that it would have the best chance of success for patients and their clinicians. to put it into something that could be part of a pre-transplant solution.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so Tutuvia is the priority product. And you mentioned you're selling that yourself. Where's
Yeah,
that? That's commercialized, and take me
yeah.
through where Tutuvia is.
Yeah, I think it came out of the validation back in 22, 23. Sorry, I'm showing my age there and not being able to remember that precise date. We certainly commercialized it, did the soft launch, what we call the early adopter program in 23. That test is sold directly by us. We went through we're a clear lab, which means that we didn't have to go to the FDA because we offer the test as a send-out test. So the hospitals send it to our labs, we do that, and then we give them the test result, which is the service. Therefore, you can qualify under the regulatory environment of being clear, covered rather than FDA. But we also chose to go through the reimbursement pathway with MolDX, is our local, the Palmetto region. And we had to go through healthcare is strange. It's about the only area of industry that you have to be selling your test, but you're not allowed to be paid for it for a while. And then you have to go through the process. So we did that, and early in April of last year, we got up what we call the coverage determination. So in reimbursement, you have to get a code; they can identify you, a price. They agree that what they're going to pay you at, and then a coverage determination. You're useful enough that we're going to say yes, we'll accept paying you. So 3 parts of it. It's quite onerous, but there we go. That's healthcare for you. And we got a coverage determination last year, which just said, yes, you are useful. Yes, we will cover you and you can get paid for your test. So we went through that. And ever since we've been what I would call is the real kind of growth part of the cycle. We're here, we're legit. We don't have to do early adopter programs anymore. We don't have to go through lots of hassles to get paid. So, we're here, and now we're just growing that side of the business, into the clinics.
Right, that makes sense. And so is that now widely commercialized or widely covered through reimbursement across the country?
Yes, because the way that the test is done in our central lab in Tennessee, then it falls under one jurisdiction. So although we've got a local coverage determination that we applied through, that actually covers us nationally. So anyone in the US can send to our lab, and we will get paid for it. So that's commercially a lot simpler than having to be everywhere, trying to go through all the local jurisdictions for a national coverage. So, we were quite pleased with that.
And why kidney transplant specifically? What's the need there, or what hasn't existed until you guys have come along?
It's the largest volume by far of transplants, so it's the
Okay.
obvious starting place. And one of the unmet needs that we saw was, first of all, the standard of care is serum creatinine tests. We've been around for what feels like 100 years, but it's not that specific. It's not that sensitive to the clinician's needs. It's a good general test, but it's a little old fashioned. Or a biopsy. And the biopsy is the gold standard. So that's when they go and take some tissue out of the organ. Very invasive, comes with risks. We are very close to a patient that refuses ever to have a biopsy again because of the complications after her last one. So it comes with problems, and it also is, called the gold standard. We call it a bronze at best standard because if you think about it, it's a very, very small part of the kidney. If you get it into the wrong area and you haven't picked up, the damage, you think it's okay, but it's not. So it's a bit hit and miss about whether you've got the right area. But still, that it gives you the most information, and still, we would say it's the standard of care.
Yeah.
But you don't want to be doing it all the time. And clinicians are faced post-transplant with this very delicate balancing act. On one hand, they're trying to manage rejection. And the way that they do that is they give what we call immunosuppression drug therapy. Suspends the entire immune system. You can imagine it's a big therapy. And if you can all remember what it was like to be in COVID, where we had no immunity against COVID and it was very scary, right? Well, this is what kidney transplant patients are facing. The clinician will suspend their immune system and it stops the rejection, which is primarily, not only, but primarily coming from the immune system attacking the graft. On the other hand, that then opens the patient to infection, complications from the drug toxicity, but also cancer. Remember when I said that we're always fighting cancer, but the body can more or less deal with it for the majority of time until it can't. And so they're finding that in the long-term outcomes, although they've not lost patients through rejection, they lose patients through these other conditions. Either they're seeing the patients back in the hospitals, which is expensive and a bit scary for everybody because they've got an infection, or long-term they're seeing the rise of losing patients to cancer. And other issues. So they're playing this balancing act. They want to give enough of that drug so they don't have rejection, but not too much that they cause all of this other problems. So you can see the need to keep monitoring that patient, what's going on. Compliance with the drug therapy is a huge problem for patients as well. Initially, everybody's very concerned and keeps on it, but the side effects are quite hard. And over time, people think, oh, I've got it. It's not a problem, and may sort of slack on some of their rejection. So things can change very quickly and quite dramatically. And so if you think about it from the clinician's point of view, they want to have good information about their patients. But biopsy is not the answer. At some point they'll want to do a biopsy, but they can't do it every 3 seconds. And, they've got to pick their moment. And if they can avoid it altogether, they will. So like 7 or 8 years ago, there was a wave of technology called cell-free DNA that hit the transplant field. And it was the first real biomarker, I would say, in after this sort of serum creatinine and biopsy standard of care. And it offered clinicians a test that they could use on a more regular basis. Was definitely a step forward, but one of the things that it offered, because it's basically what we call a late biomarker, it picks up the debris in the blood from injury, right? That's a horrible simplification. You'll have to forgive me, and I hope no clinicians listening to this. But it picks up the debris. So it's after injury has happened, a little later in the process, and it's highly non-specific. So it says something's going on, but I can't tell you what. And the problem is that with some of the infections, you need to be, it'll give you a positive on cell-free DNA. And so they say, okay, I think rejection's happening, and raise the level of the therapies, when in fact the answer is to reduce them. So, clinicians knew that it was good, it was a step forward, but it had elements that was a little blind. And our technology is the next step forward. And that was based on this newer technology, doesn't get confounded by injury. It's much earlier in the process. And so it's an early biomarker. It's like the check engine light. It says something's about to happen and you need to intervene. So earlier in the process was good, but it enabled us to go into areas like, for example, if you've had a prior transplant, the old organ's still left in the body, it's still shedding off all this kind of injury markers. Cell-free DNA is picking up that, can't tell you about the new organ. So, but we don't get confused by that. If you have 2 organs going on at the same time, what we call multiple transplant, again, the lack of specificity was hurting the performance in those areas, and clinicians are looking to see ours. Conditions like DGF very, very early on, that's delayed graft function. Essentially, when we transport organs to the patient, they're in a very, very sophisticated cool box. And so it takes some time to warm up in the body, or that's the delay. And you don't know whether it's very early on. So you've got all of the injury markers from the surgery being picked up by cell-free DNA. And there is this idea from clinicians like, I want to know what's going on. Is it rejection, or is it just slow to warm up? All of these areas are big subgroups and unmet need from the current situation. And we were able to step in with our technology and say, good news, we can kind of offer some real advantages here. We have a kind of very complementary view on how we fit into the environment with the current testing regime.
Wow. So, okay, so I mean, there's a lot. There's so much the test can do compared to what's previously been done. I mean, obviously, we're
We
moving
believe so. We
away.
believe it's huge, right?
Yeah, we're moving away from biopsies, obviously, as fast as we can, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's fast. You know, it's still a massive part of the healthcare system. But this allows for the avoidance of unnecessary immune suppression, which can cause huge problems later on for patients. But it also allows you to be early in detecting potential challenges so that they can be dealt with, compared to cell-free DNA, which happens much later. Am I oversimplifying it? But am I on the right page?
The way I might put it is that we're another tool in the toolkit. Clinicians use a lot in their decision making, and they're always looking for more precise, more
Yeah,
personalized information
yeah,
earlier in the process, more, as specific as you can get with the information you give them, the more that they've got to put in their whole decision making. And they are
yeah,
doing this balancing. Can I back off immunosuppression safely without rejection? Can I get an early view so I can, sometimes there are conditions like the BK virus is what the clinician says is a slow burn rather than a huge house fire. And so that they, can modify their approach a little bit more accurately, a little bit more earlier, and a little bit more precisely. And having an extra tool in their toolkit is what we call it. Enables them in their total decision making to make what we hope is we help them make better decisions. And that's how I would put it, rather than anything else. But that toolkit's a bit overused in the industry as an analogy, but I think it's a good one.
I love it. Yeah, great. And so it feels like you've achieved a hell of a lot in 5 years as a company, IPOing on day one, licensing out a test already to a big strategic, and being commercialized for a few years now through your own clear lab. Um, help me to understand that, because when the Verici started, how developed was the technology at that point, when you and then we'll go into the IPO, because that's obviously the next logical question that we have to ask. But where was Verici on day one? Where was the science?
Just where it should have been and where our expectations were. When you take something out of academia,
Yeah,
it hasn't been through the rigor of what we call product development in healthcare. Healthcare is a very, very regulated environment for very good reasons. And when you're doing discovery work in academia, you do not have to be bound by that. You can, you're really looking to see, have I got something there? And if so, I've made an invention, right?
yeah,
But it's a bit like if you think about an engineered product, the proof of concept, if you've ever seen one, are so clunky and they've got wires hanging out and everything like that, is enough to take to, I don't know, Siemens, for example, and say, I got something that you want to develop. The big shiny product at the end looks nothing like the proof of concept that came from the inventor. And
yeah.
that's what it's like with diagnostics. So we got something with wires hanging out and, enough there, and it was published to say something's there. We then took it and, Patty and her team are very well experienced in product development in a regulated environment, and they put it through its paces. And, we do a big clinical trial to say, can we validate what looks very promising in the discovery? And then once you've validated it, then you launch it, and then you go through kind of real world utility studies, etc. There is a kind of almost a set path to how you commercialize in healthcare. And we've done that. So yeah, I would say it came out of Mount Sinai. And in the state that we would have expected it to. And then there is a lot of work that goes into not only putting it through product development, finalize, we were able to use more up-to-date AI techniques. Could we refine the signature? Could we package it in a different way? And we did all of that. And you do things like analytical validation. Is it robust? Is it reproducible? There's a lot that goes into product development, and it's a complete skill set. I was very lucky to have a very experienced and dedicated team that continues to this day, which is how we've managed to do a lot in a short amount of time. So shout out to them. But you put that through, and then you put it through the trial, and you beat it up. You put it under the most difficult of circumstances you can. If it still comes out with a good performance, you got something that's ready for the clinic.
So at this point, my first question would normally be, how much capital have you raised? But then we have to so you went down the IPO route on day one.
Yeah.
Just explain that to me, because that's rare in itself. How did that come about, and why was that the right path to go down?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Two Brits talking to a US audience about fundraising in the public environment. So in London, there is a market on the London Stock Exchange called AIM. And this was set up by Lawson, I think, when he was Chancellor. But anyway, the way it was set up was to recognize something that we've known for years, that there is this sort of gap in financing. There's this sort of early seed and private market, and then there is this sort of established public market later on, right? So if you think in the US of NASDAQ, but the listing requirements are high. And then you've got this middle ground of how do you get from A to B? Or really what is A to Z, maybe, or Z for anybody that's British. And, you have to go through this, what we call funding chasm. And the AIM market was set up to facilitate that. So it gave tax advantages to a long-term hold. And so it sort of wasn't like the normal stock exchange where you can buy and sell on a daily basis. It said if you hold the investment in these newer growth, pre-revenue companies, generally, milestone-based value drivers, this sort of idea that companies are not quite ready for full mature public, that they're a longer-term hold. You will get a tax break. And that's survived to the current day. And it's a very unique market. I wish there were more markets like this, around the world, because it really addresses this idea of how do you grow a company. So we took advantage of that, and we went quite early. At the time in the year 2000, diagnostics were obviously being encouraged by COVID testing. The market was very growth oriented, looking for young companies like ourselves that had huge promise and milestones along the way to give value drivers. And so we went public in November of 2020. It was a COVID IPO, all done on Zoom. And then we were able to do that. Yeah, I didn't get to ring any bell though, or go drink champagne, but we did it nevertheless. And that was and the market's been generally very supportive. So we raised 14.5 million sterling in that first IPO, and we've done subsequent raises since then. So we're sort of sitting at the moment, let me convert it into US dollars, just under 50 million in US dollars. And so you can see it's a supportive growth generated market. Now, the market also turned a little bit post-COVID. We call it the post-COVID diagnostics hangover that never kind of stopped. And then there was a push towards companies, getting to revenue, which we have done. And as long as we hit our milestones, we got to the revenue. Now we're showing the growth. We have been continued to be supported by the London market, albeit at a quite low valuation, but that will come in time as we move through our, growth story, revenue onto profitability, etc. But I would advocate AIM as a market. It got beaten up over the last 5 years. We saw a lot of outflows. And I would say shame, because the world needs a market like that. to facilitate companies going through what I would say is really quite a tough chasm to cross,
Yeah.
funding wise.
And with you now having obviously the licensing agreement, but also a fully commercialized product, will there be the need to raise further capital, or are you now sort of aiming for organic growth?
A little bit of both. There's this phrase, the holy grail is cash flow break even, and we're not there yet. So we still need equity dollars. We do, but we're also, partially offsetting the total need. We're not just a cost story. So we are
Yeah.
partially self-funded. Our organic growth is good. It's very healthy. We will get there along the way. But yeah, there's still a need for equity dollars, but becoming less and less over the latter years.
And so, where does this company sit today in terms of how's it set up, sort of commercially, operationally, to sort of win in the market?
So we're US focused. The majority of the team is in the US, not all of it, but the majority. And we're focused on the US market. Generally speaking, in diagnostics, we always think about the global market as a third, a third, a third. Third Europe, a third the US, and rest of the world. It's the biggest market for transplant, for sure. Um, you know, um, that's not totally fragmented like Europe, right, where you have a fragmentation, or Asia or whatever, different countries. So
Yep.
we're very US focused, and we have been to date. We will look worldwide once we've kind of got the US under our belt. We have a team that is uh, effectively lab is in Franklin, just outside of Nashville in Tennessee. uh, and huge catchment area for very skilled people. So the lab team are top notch, and we constantly get complimented on their performance and their skill level. So that's very good for us to have kind of a physical presence. We do have obviously people working out of home offices, and the classic environment for that is our sales force. We're not, we don't have a big enough sales force to cover ourselves nationally. We're growing in a more kind of modular fashion. You grow too fast, you fail. It's very easy. It's a high risk situation for companies, which is sometimes they're a victim of their own success.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to grow methodically, organically, and in a way that we can absorb. So we have about a third of the sales force to cover uh, our national needs, and we're building up the support to support them as well as what we've got operationally. So a little bit virtual, a little bit physical location. So a little bit of the split. That's why I'm in California and the lab is in Tennessee. But nevertheless, very very US focused.
Yeah, makes sense. And what's the future look like from here then for Verici? What milestones, growth, expansion? What's coming up that we should be on the lookout for?
Growth. We've just, I told everyone I was very excited about this year and continue to be so. It's the time when you can really see the fruits of your labors come in. So growth for us is our major milestone at the moment. But don't forget, we always think about our pipeline and our other, small but growing side of the business is what we call the services. But at the moment, the team has a great sophistication in its skill set between the lab skills in this kind of cutting edge technology, and our bioinformatics team that are able to, incorporate the combination of lab with AI and our discovery in this area in both proteins and RNA. And we do get, other institutions, companies come to us and ask us to help out on projects or clinical trials, etc. That's another growth area of the business. I'd love to spend more time on it, but it's another string to our bow. And of course, we have the old milestones of product development, and the long-term outcome test, the urine-based testing, all of these programs have tests to come out and be launched themselves. So a little bit revenue, a little bit growth.
Love it. You mentioned optimism, which is always good to hear. We hear a lot of optimism this year in the market, but what's your take on the diagnostics landscape and where we are as an industry at the moment?
Diagnostics is due a recovery. We had the hangover as COVID testing disappeared, and that sort of huge bump in special revenues disappeared. And you always expect a kind of correction after that. And we went through the hangover. The difficulty for all of healthcare actually is it just didn't stop falling. And I think, for the last 4 years, it's been a tough environment for companies, particularly diagnostics. We saw a little bounce back, a little bit more optimism. Things go in cycles. You just have to grit your teeth and wait for it to come back. And that has been, unfortunately, a little bit dampened by the current conflict, or let's say war, in the Middle East with Iran. And, I think concerns about energy prices and the knock-on effect in any in the economies. I think it's hitting the whole of markets, not just healthcare. But it has. It's a bit like an early spring in diagnostics. The sun came out, the plants started blossoming, and then you got the heavy frost, right? So we're looking at damage from a heavy frost, but it won't necessarily damage the forthcoming summer.
I love, yeah. I mean, I completely agree. To be honest, I think we're sitting on the edge of something really special. I'm fortunate in that the conversations I get to have, now I'm at the point where that it's easy to pick up where there's great science and there's unmet need, but it's also great to see so many companies that are being set up with better due diligence and control to be able to actually survive and then thrive, and that's been, and you mentioned it yourself with the commercial growth. You can grow too quickly, and I think we've seen that a lot in the last, obviously the post-COVID boom. When the tide went out, there's a saying there that I won't finish, but when the tide went out, we definitely seen some companies get found out. And even last year, we were still seeing some diagnostics companies that had overinflated or overinvested in the commercial engine, and it came crashing down. Where the pressure was on these companies, who's to say? But I do think there's been a lot of VCs that have said, and VCs who have already invested, and they go back to the well and say, hey, we're ready for our next round. And the VCs will go, you got to show us more commercially. And they go, okay, higher, higher, more sales reps. And that's just not the answer. We see that. But I do think the way we're moving is there is good due diligence in the industry on how to build better companies, better operations. And I am optimistic about where diagnostics in the science, AI, precision medicine, all these things are going. I think we're a sleeping giant, and I do think we're waking up.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, so commercial growth and the expectations is an interesting one. We always talk about hockey stick growth in
Classic.
revenues, and I
Yeah.
always say in healthcare it's a lacrosse stick. It's that flatter beginning, but once you're into the growth, it's more sticky. So, if you get the hockey stick in tech, the problem is somebody comes up with the next version of the iPhone, and the old iPhone is, everyone's ditching, right?
Yeah.
There's no real stickiness there. They may be into brands or technologies, but, you also have to think about the stickiness. So in healthcare, once you have to go slower in the beginning and understand that, you have to build up trust. This is patients at the other end. Clinicians aren't
Yeah.
going to do the latest fad. But once they're there and once you're trusted, then you're embedded. And so long term, it takes a different type of investor to be in healthcare. They have to be, they have to hold their nerve in the beginning and say, yeah, that slow sort of initial part of that revenue growth, is totally acceptable. We're funding to it, and we're funding for that future stickiness once they're embedded in those healthcare systems.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. Sarah, this has been awesome, to be honest. It's such a unique story, and the journey you guys have gone through, the path you took through the IPO setup, which is, I mean, sounds really positive. Also, the success that you guys have already seen through licensing agreements, commercializing. There's a lot of success here, but it also feels like you're just getting started, and the commercial engine starts to really purr. Thank you for coming on and sharing the story. This was awesome.
Thank you for having me. I love chatting with you.